Hello. So today we're gonna go over a fun game that I played yesterday. So this isn't on the new patch, but I feel like this is still strong. Like nothing really changed about it. What we're gonna be playing is a STORYWEAVER game. So I was playing it a lot yesterday, but especially when I'm like looking for lines that are less contested, I think playing around 7 STORYWEAVER is very strong. Especially in certain like really high variance galaxies. So for example, this one's loot subscription. So whenever you play loot subscription, the main thought process I have when I immediately see loot subscription portal is that I need to play a comp that can take a spat really well, because spatulas really spike a board, right? Like for example, if you have umbral and you get an umbral spat, right, it really spikes your board. You can even build a board around it. As well as like certain other comps like Dragon Lord can really spike things, but I'm talking more about craftable spats, right? Like Mythic is really strong for like a Lilia board, for example. So a lot of times, if you're playing loot subscription, you're not playing around a comp that can easily use a spatula, then everybody else in the lobby spikes really hard, and you kind of just like sit there and don't get much stronger, and it really affects how you have to play the game and your average placement, right? I think I notoriously made jokes because one time I took built differently, so that's the one where there's no active augments, so like, or sorry, no active traits, right? So you're just playing like all different units, and took it in loot subscription. I was in a really good spot for it, so I had like all my whole board 4 costs, and then loot subscription started dropping spatulas. It dropped like 3 spatulas in a row, and I just did not spike, and I went bot 4, right? I had a really good spot. I was like playing for like first, and then like 2 turns later, loot subscription. 2 stages later, I got a 5th. You know, everybody else just like giga spiked, right? So yeah, this was streamed yesterday. If you don't know, I might stream again today, but usually like I stream on Twitch. I'm starting to stream a bit more frequently because I'm trying to grind a little bit before the next set, right? Try and get like, you know, a little bit higher. Anyways, I kind of have a STORYWEAVER opener in that I do have like 2 STORYWEAVER units. I have a Garen pair, right? So you might look at it and think like, okay, well, STORYWEAVER isn't necessarily the strongest one. I think in the statistics, we can check it later, if I remember. But in the statistics, STORYWEAVER spat is one of the worst spats to make, at least as of last patch. I don't know if it improved itself at one point. I take Call to Adventure. So the reason I take Call to Adventure here is because it upgrades my Garen, right? That's the first reason. Sorry, I'm getting the inking to work, so just give me a second. So I can draw on everything. Alright, so what this does is basically every 2 kills your Kayle gets an increase in damage, right? So I want to play towards STORYWEAVER. The first drop is a spatula, so it works out really well. Now I kind of high rolled into it. I was thinking that the first drop might be a spatula. Typically what you should do is you should, like, if you're playing around a comp that really wants a spatula, especially in loot subscription, what you can do if you want is you can wait to pick your augment till the last second, and then scout around to see if someone picks up their loot subscription drop, right? And then you can see what the loot subscription drop is. So I saw that it was a gold orb, but I didn't know that it was a spatula. It could have been anything. But I just kind of took it because I said eventually there might be a spat drop, and STORYWEAVER spat, like STORYWEAVER +1, is really good with STORYWEAVER combo, stabilize you really hard, right? So this also, not only does it give like a stacking Kayle that would work, it's not the strongest augment by any means. I think in the stats it doesn't even perform that well, but in this spot it gave me a Garen upgrade, and I did have like a little bit of like a nice little STORYWEAVER opener. For Kayle, I'll talk about it later, but I like, if I'm playing towards Kayle, I usually go for like, it's very situational, but a lot of times I just go for red Kayle as my default, because I feel like red Kayle, you get punished the least for it, right? Green Kayle is really bad with Kai'Sa. Blue Kayle is kind of bad with anything that's not like a solid AP comp. But red Kayle is kind of universally good with everything, and it probably caps the highest out of all of the Kayles. So it's like, to me, it always seems like red Kayle is like my default. If I feel like I'm in a lobby that's like really like scary, sometimes I just go for green Kayle. If I don't have much direction, because green Kayle helps you streak early. That's like it, like green Kayle streaks early, doesn't cap as high, and blue Kayle, it's really good, but you're kind of forced into like an AP line. You can play non-AP with it, but then like at that point it just doesn't work out that well. Anyways, I don't have the spatula to slam, so I'm just gonna try and play towards just general Storyweaver line. We'll go over the different types of boards you can build with Storyweaver, but I feel kind of comfortable with this, and definitely playing towards like a top 4 is pretty easy with a Storyweaver comp. Anyway, so the first thing I make, sorry, I had to like chill for a second. The first thing that I make is Shiv here. The reason I make Shiv is that I just want to have Shred for this Kale, right? I want this Kale to do as much damage as possible. Now I'm kind of committed to Red Kale. You can't switch your Kales afterwards. So, because I didn't start with Green Kale, my Kale doesn't have Shred or Sundering. So instead, I make a bow. Instead I use my bow and my tier just to make sure that my Kale, at least early game, is killing units, right? I want to reduce their magic resistance so that my Kale can do some more damage. And here I'm basically just looking for a chainmail, right? It's not like the most wanted item, right? Which is really nice. That's the benefit of Storyweaver, right? Like, let's say I was playing towards Porcelain, right? Porcelain uses a bow for its spat. A bow is a really high demand item. It's also really difficult to, like, you know, you usually need those for like your carries. Like, let's say you're playing Ash and then you want to make a Porcelain emblem. You need bows for Ash, so then you need an extra bow for the Porcelain emblem, right? Stuff like that doesn't really synergize well. It doesn't work out that nicely. But this is really strong. This is what I mean by you spike really hard, right? I'm stage 5, level 5, and I'm 5 Storyweaver, right? I have this Kale that's going to do a shit ton of damage, right? And I don't really have much of a worry that I won't streak this stage. There might be somebody that's like really fucking strong. But basically, Red Kale just makes it so the Kale has attack speed. Blue Kale now, you'll see when she attacks, it shoots like this arrow that's very wide, right? So when she actually casts, you'll see it. She's going to cast right about now. Boom. You see how it's like this giant, like, it's this giant, like, wide beam, right? So basically that's like the benefit of Blue Kale. Basically your attack is really wide. When you want to play around Blue Kale, you'll see that I position Kale a little bit later. Like, now my positioning isn't the best, but you'll eventually see that I start to position my Kale in the middle of the fights, and you'll start to see, like, what you want to do is you want to kind of arrange it so that the Kale hits the units as much as possible, as many frontline units as possible. Here, Azir's moving around the augments. This is fantastic for me. So I'm going to talk about this a lot in a different guide, but if you don't know about it, basically, like, there's different types of variants in TFT, especially in like these type of games. For me, at least, when I'm looking at these games, like something like Loot Subscription is high variance where it can like shuffle the placements, right? There's different kinds of variants. When you're shuffling around the placements, it kind of means like somebody can like get something from Loot Subscription. It could be like a really, really broken thing, like a really broken item, or an emblem that really ties together their team. Like, there's something that can really like sway the position, right? That's like, you know, depending on where you are in the leaderboard, it can like drastically change. Like like somebody going last place can suddenly be in a position for first. Somebody in first place can like slowly bleed out, right? But Loot Subscription, a lot of times, just being strong early, you can mitigate those like wild swings, right? If you're strong early, or if you're playing with like a lot of HP, you'll be able to work around some of these wild swings because you'll have time to adjust based on like having HP. Here I lost. This guy just like way stronger than me. I think he's 4 Umbral already, a Loon with an item. My positioning was also bad, which I'll talk about later. My Kale being cornered here, I didn't think it mattered too much for this stage. I was kind of just talking to chat, but this guy's units were all here. So when my Kale attacked, right, I'm talking about it in my stream because I was live. That's why I'm like moving around stuff and showing, but as you can see, that I'm pointing it out, right? These 3 are in a line, so if I position my Kale here, she would shoot and the wide beam would hit all the frontline units, as opposed to when my Kale was here and she shot the beam and it pretty much only hit 1 or 2 units, right? Just the wideness, when you have Blue Kale and you're playing around Kale carry, it's really important to position your Kale such that her beam hits like as many units as possible to make sure you're maximizing your damage output, right? Anyways, what I was saying is, with something like Loot Subscription, you can kind of play around it as long as you like try to preserve HP, right? Loot Subscription, like, you can wildly swing, but if you want to be more consistent, a lot of times you just want to be like middle of the pack, right? Where you can take advantage of a high roll, but if you low roll, you don't necessarily like, you know, you don't want to out low, as long as you don't out low roll the low rollers, you can probably like play for a top 4, right? There's still a lot of placements you can gain. With something like this now, the Azir, as you can see, there's no augment all of stage 3. I love to see that. No augment stage 3 is going to be a really strong game for me. Why? Because I took a scaling augment that I'm already very strong early, right? I have this Storyweaver start, right? Here I position my Kayle here. You'll see that she'll hit more of the units, right? It would have been nicer if she was 1 over, because then I would have guaranteed hit all of the frontline units. But basically, a lot of people, like this guy, for example, he just has Magic Wand. It's not like the strongest augment, it's not the weakest augment, but he doesn't have anything that's like super crazy, right? The absence of augments widens the gap. The people that are high rolling, that have like a good start, will continue to have a good start and will continue to get ahead. And a lot of the people that don't have a good start, maybe are suffering, maybe not having like as much direction, they're basically just gonna lose out more and more. Because they just won't have like an augment to kind of turn things around, right? For me, because I'm starting with Storyweaver is a trait that is very strong early. So just by nature of having like the extra Kayle that scales and just doing a bunch of damage, and because I'm playing around this 5 Storyweaver, right? I'm doing really well here. Here I kind of like, I'm trying to bait out a positioning, but it doesn't really work out here. But basically what it means is that I'm just gonna keep winning or being like really strong, and I'm gonna get progressively more ahead of the rest of the lobby, right? It's similar to like Crab Rave, right? When you remove the augments, it's similar to like something like Crab Rave. Like if somebody high rolls and gets like a really strong unit early with Crab Rave, then they just get a bunch of gold and they can go level 9, go level 10 and cap out their board. But for somebody that, like, you know, if you spend all your gold and you miss on your units, then now you're just super far behind, because while those people are going to level 9 and level 10, you're stuck on like level 8 looking for like an upgrade, right? Now that's a similar situation as removing the augments, right? Because when you remove the augments, if someone's low rolling, usually you have an augment that can help compensate for that, right? If someone's high rolling, then they low roll the augments, right? It adds that extra variance that allows the field to like stay relatively close. But anyways, I'm just gonna sit here and just win a lot of these fights because I'm 5 Storyweaver, right? And I'm just gonna preserve a lot of HP. It loot subscription, so like, you know, I can take advantage of a lot of this stuff. The great part about playing around Kayle carry, I might as well just show the board a little bit, right? Let's just go like here. Let's go here and boop. So this is the current patch. I'm gonna go on the patch right before this one, just because there's not as many stats right now. I don't think it really changes much, but anyways, when you're playing 7 Storyweaver, as you can see, 7 Storyweaver does average quite high. It averages like a 4.3, right? That's pretty good comparatively to like all the other comps for how easy it is to play. Now, a lot of the times you do want to get towards like these high caps, like Aurelia, Rakan, Wukong, right? As you can see, like a lot of times, playing around like Zyra's okay because she's Sage, but I think Zoe is like plus Delta. Yeah, as you look at you playing around Zoe, like with 7 Storyweaver, a lot of times it's plus Delta, meaning that you place worse if you're playing around Zoe with this comp. But typically if you're playing around like a max cap board, you do really high, and that's why I typically play towards like those max caps, right? But with 7 Storyweaver, because your Kayle is your main carry, items become really easy. As long as you have Shred and anti-heal, you can really do a lot with just like being very flexible and just building around frontline, just making like a very simple board, right? You don't have to worry about like item economy as much. You don't have to worry about like particular like units. You can kind of just play around whatever you get, right? For example, I'll just go into Team Builder and I'll just start with like putting in the Storyweaver units just so you can see a little bit of what I mean, right? So let's just put all the Storyweavers, right? If you don't have a spatula, 7 Storyweavers is a little bit hard to hit because you need the Aurelia. But basically, right out the gate, you kind of have like a little package that works really well for different parts of the game, right? Typically, you have like the Galio and the Riven as a bruiser, so you're always keeping the Galio and the Riven. And then you have the Garen, you have the Sivir, you have the Kayle. And we'll talk about how to build the Kayle after, but I'll just throw all the units on the board, right? If you're playing around a Storyweaver emblem, that's typically when you go for this comp, because it's really hard to stabilize on level 8 without the Aurelia. Because without 7 Storyweaver, like you have to chase a Galio and an Aurelia, it becomes very difficult. But it used to be like a very fast 9 comp, right? If you think you can fast 9, you could maybe play around this. But basically what you would do is there's different boards you can play, right? So typically, like one of the ones that's really common that you see is you play around we'll start with just like regular Story Weaver, right? If you're playing around this, these are 7 units, right? On level 8, you can basically play anybody that synergizes with something, right? Typically, you'll see like either a Nautilus or you'll see a Lee Sin, like for Duelist with Irelia. But a lot of times it's like it's very difficult because you're not expected to find this Irelia soon. If you're playing around level 10, then typically you'll put in like Wukong, Rakan, and you'll play something like this, right? Because you'd rather just play the legendary units, right? The Duelist isn't that important on Irelia. It's important, but it's not like game breaking. A lot of times it's better because you're playing around Kayle carry a lot of the times with these comps, that you can just play Rakan for the extra Altruist and you can play Wukong for the extra Sage, right? And then, but the thing is, like, if you drop one of the units, your whole board becomes a lot more flexible, right? So let's pretend that we have a Story Weaver +1 now, right? I'll just leave these units because these are like the main units you want to hit, right? When you have a Story Weaver +1, a lot of times you'll see a board that looks something like this. Like you'll put Morgana and where's Alawi? And Alawi, right? So Alawi helps your front line. It just gives you a little bit more front line. And because you're playing Morgana, Alawi, you're kind of building towards like Arcanist, Sage. So Sage gives backline AP, Arcanist gives backline AP, and a lot of times you're going for Zoe 3, right? This is like the way that you usually see it. And Zoe, you're basically just building like full damage items, right? I don't think the items are that important, but typically you'll see something along the lines of like Shojin is pretty safe for item economy. You'll see something like Shojin, Rabadons. Oops, where's Rabadons? I'm struggling. Rabadons and like Nashers. I see this build a lot, right? I also see blue buff in place of this sometimes. I think blue buff is pretty good on Zoe as well. But the items on Zoe aren't that great. You just want like Giga AP items because Zoe works really well off killing units. I think the Biss is something along the lines of these. But I usually don't go for this line. I think the Zoe line is kind of bait. I think going for Zoe 3 in this type of setup. Oh, and then you put Story Weaver on like Alawi, right? And then your 7 Story Weaver. I feel like this is really bait. I feel like this Zoe 3 always is underwhelming. Unless you natural the Zoe for free, I feel like you're better off just playing around Irelia and capping out your board later. Because you can usually go fast 9 off 7 Story Weaver just because the Kayle damage is so big, right? So typically the board that I'll play with a +1 Story Weaver is I'll just go for level 9 cap. And I'll play around, like usually around Wukong and, where is it? Rakan, like this. And a lot of times Lee Sin as well. And I'll just play like literally like something like this, right? I'll just play like the full Dragon Lord setup because the Dragon Lord works really well with the Irelia. You get the extra Altruist and you can kind of be really flexible with this, right? Right now this is only 8 units, right? So you can even build towards like 1 extra. So sometimes I'll even put Soraka and then you get like Heavenly Altruist. Oh wait, I'm missing a Story Weaver, that's why. Zoe's usually here. Yeah, there you go. And I'll play something like this. But the thing is, the Rakan and the Wukong are really flexible. Because as you can see, with your front line, you can pretty much play anybody. Right? So like you don't necessarily need Rakan. You don't necessarily need Wukong. I usually do like Rakan. But a lot of times, you'll just see me play like a random other unit. Right? You can just play like a random Nautilus. Just have an extra Warden to help out the Garen. You can just play like an extra 5 cost. Right? Like an extra set. To help out your front line with the Warden. Right? You can play an extra Lysandra. Just fuck it. Right? Just Lysandra. Stall out the comp. Because the thing is, the main damage you're having is this Kayle, right? Now, in terms of Kayle, typically what I do, there's different builds for Kayle, right? If you're playing around the Zoe reroll, typically you just put the blue Kayle, right? I think triple blue Kayle is really strong, right? Like this. But the thing is, I just don't like this first blue because I feel like it's a lot of diminishing returns. Because you gain so much ability power over the course of time, and the Kayle has so much extra damage, and because usually you're playing around Sage and Altruist and all of these like augments like this, I usually don't like blue Kayle. I usually lean towards red Kayle because the thing is, in the worst case scenario, you can just play Kai'Sa if you start with red, right? If you start with red Kayle is the best for Kai'Sa, so a lot of times you can just randomly play Kai'Sa and you'll be fine. And then in the other case, I'll start with green Kayle because green Kayle is really strong early game because this extra shred really works out really well. And late game, it doesn't cap as high because I think red Kayle just does the most damage, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I think blue Kayle technically does more damage, but it's really situational because you get less team buffs. But with green Kayle, it makes it a lot easier to move around your Kayle in order to position her well because you don't have to worry about somebody else dealing with the shred because the shred is built into the Kayle, right? And it also helps out with your items because you can delay making shred and sundering for a lot later in the game. But anyways, once you have like this little core of units, pretty much anything that synergizes Altruist, Arcanist, Dragonlord, not Fortune, Sage, Warden, like anybody that fits in, you can just put in with the emblem and do well, right? Like a lot of times mid game I'll play a Diana, right? I'll play like Diana, Lee Sin, right? Which is a little bit less expensive. And then you get an extra Sage, extra Dragonlord, and you just put an emblem on one of these, right? You're pretty, well, I have a Lee Sin on already. But you have like a pretty stable little group of units that you can really play around. And that's what's really nice about it. That went a little bit long, so we'll just go back a little bit here. But basically, you'll see here that this is what I was saying with flexible. I didn't really show all of the options in the board, but here I'm just playing a Sylas, right? I'm playing a Diana, and I'm playing a random Sylas, right? Now, does Sylas really matter? It's like one bruiser, sure, but he's just a frontline unit, right? Because your Kale's doing so much damage, you really just want to stall and make sure that the Kale doesn't get wrapped or killed. But as you can see, I'm trying to always position my Kale on the same side as the enemies to try and do the maximum amount of damage to the enemies, right? You just want to have like this wide beam of Kale hitting all of the units in order to do as much damage as possible. And you'll see that I shuffle my Kale around a lot. This is a comp where you really have to scout your opponents. I know you might not like scouting, especially if you're starting out in the game. It might be a little bit daunting, or you might have like the heebie-jeebies of like, ooh, it's like I'm looking at their board. You know, that's not very nice. But basically, you just always want to have your Kale position such that it's hitting as many units as possible, right? You want her to always shoot on a flat line, right? Like, I don't know, like, I guess maybe this is more advanced, but I studied, like, physics, right? When you have, like, a wave and you have, like, the wave front, you always want to make sure the wave front is, like, the same as all of the, you want to make it aligned with all of the units, right? You want this wave front to hit as many units as possible, right? Because if you position your Kale in the corner, for example, and then you shoot, the wavefront's not perpendicular, right? You want the wavefront to be perpendicular to, you know what I mean? Never mind. I'm a nerd. I study too much physics. Anyways, so here I level up. I just put in a Soraka, right? Soraka is really strong. As you can see, I'm still 5 Storyweaver. As soon as I find a Galio, I can put in the Sivir and I can play 7 Storyweaver. That's the great thing. You can basically put Sivir and Sivir can hold Irelia items. Here, I don't really hit anything that's really great. I just take Deathfire Grasp because Deathfire Grasp may be on Sylas and I have AP items. It kind of synergizes okay. You know, I can put on somebody else later. I didn't slam my items. I do this a lot because sometimes I panic. But what you should do is, you see how I'm like building the items on a moving unit? You should just build them on a unit on your bench and then sell it so that you don't have to do less things. But like, I have bad APM. But anyways, look, we're 1 augment and there's been no augment at stage 4, right? And we're gonna get our last augment at the end of stage. We're gonna get our second augment at the end of stage 4. This is what I mean by, like, I have a really strong board with Storyweaver and I already spiked that I have like this, right? So long as I hit 7 Storyweaver soon, I'll continue to be ahead. This guy's very strong because he's reroll and he already hit Senna 3, right? But as you can see, there's like a larger disparity, right? Look, there's 3 people that are 80, 1 person that's 70, and then there's a bunch of people that are like 20 and 30 HP, right? Not having the augment, this is what I mean. It makes the gap wider, right? These guys here are having a much harder time than these guys that have like a strong start, right? This guy is too healthy and he's just re-rolling, right? So he's spiking really early because he's hitting his 2-cost units, right? And me, I spike really early. Now this guy, I kind of position on wrong side, right? The snipers are getting a lot more value because I didn't position on this side. But as you can see, Ghostly +1, re-rolling Ghostlies, 50 gold, just not a care in the world, right? For me at least, I'm kind of like trying to, I don't want to send it. Like, I have enough gold to send it and look for a Galio and spike. But the reason I don't want to do that right away is because I have intentions of going 9, right? I'm level 7 right now. I got my streak snapped multiple times. That's the only reason I'm not rich, right? I did win a lot of fights, right? But I lost like 1 or 2 main fights, typically to like this guy or one of the other people, like the Umbral player, that were really, really strong for a really long time, right? And here I'm just debating if I put in Umbral for Sylas, but I think it's fine. But basically, I'm just looking for a nice clean transition to level 9, right? I feel like I'm pretty strong compared to a lot of players in the lobby. And I have a lot of HP, so I'm greeding a little bit, so I don't want to just go 8 and waste all my gold. I'd rather wait as long as possible, delay my level 8, and then maybe figure it out later. So I lose this fight as well, right? I'm starting to drop a little bit, right? So now's probably the point where I'm gonna roll right after carousel, right? So right after carousel is the next perfect interval that you don't waste any gold when you level. So I'm gonna go to level 8. I'm gonna roll a little bit, look for a Galio, and then once I have Galio, I should be stable, right? I should be stable to go 9, right? But I just wanted to preserve a little bit of money just to make sure that I can make it there. But yeah, that's what I was saying with like the lack of augments. As you can see, not only is loot subscription really high variance, so some people had really strong openers and some people didn't have strong openers, but the lack of augments in this lobby is really like separating the pack, right? So I feel like I'm gonna get a top 4 no matter what. My Kayle is also scaling, so as soon as I hit Kayle 3 where she gets like a huge damage buff, I'll be a lot stronger. So now I'm rolling. I'm basically just looking for a Galio, right? Silas upgrade it would be nice too. And I have the Galio, right? So we put in Galio. We get this in. Nice. Technically, I don't have a replacement Zyra yet, but I think Zoe usually is a little bit better of an item holder. As you can see, though, I'm not in much of a position to reroll Zoe. And this is what I find a lot of the time, is that I don't necessarily... I'm not necessarily able to reroll Zoe. A Silas 2 is still a Silas 2, right? I know I'm 3 Bruiser, but it doesn't really matter, right? Does Arcanist or Heavenly or Sage, like, am I gonna lose a Silas 2 to play like a random Sage unit or Diana or a trick shot for Sivir, right? A lot of times, like, when you look at these buffs on the side, you also have to look at the quality of your units, right? I have 3 item Silas 2. That's like my main carry besides the Kayle. I'm pretty set, right? I'm pretty good. But this is what makes StoryWeaver really nice, is like I was showing different variations. On your level 8, if you have a StoryWeaver +1, you can pretty much play any 4 cost, right? You can play like a Lilia, you can play a Morgana, you can play a Warden like Nautilus. You can play like even Orin, a random Orin probably isn't even that bad, right? As long as you have like some sort of upgrade here. Like maybe Ashe is a little bit hard to play around because she really doesn't do anything. But like pretty much any frontline unit and most backline units, you can just play around and just itemize them and just like use it to tempo your way to 9, right? Because all you want to do is you want to not have to spend any money, right? And you want to be able to just like preserve enough HP that you can go 9. And then when you're level 9, you're trying to want to fit in like Irelia, Dragon Lords, and do like that max cap version that I was showing you where you play like Wukong. You try and play Wukong, Rakan, Irelia, Lee Sin as like the little package, which I've talked about before. I think I did other StoryWeaver videos before, but that's the line that I usually like to play around. I know that a lot of people try to play around Zoe reroll. I feel like it's really unreliable, especially if you don't hit the Zoe. I think a Zoe 2 is very stable though. Here I still have a Zoe 1. If I had a Zoe 2, these items would definitely be better on a Zoe 2. But yeah, if I can also switch these items to like some sort of backline AP unit, right? Like if I make it to level if I make it to level 9, then I can also play towards like what's his name, like Azir with those items, and it's probably okay, right? There's a lot of options, but anyways, I'm just playing around the Silas for now. I'm probably always gonna play what's her name, Soraka. I just really like Altruist, right? I think it's one of my favorite traits this set. I think the extra armor that you get, especially considering that you're gonna have like a semi-bruiser frontline, it really helps to build tankiness. And as you can see, this Kayle just takes a while to cast. That's why attack speed is really important, right? That's why I really like this red buff, this red start. Because if you watch the Kayle, especially when she's trying to like get going, she spends so long before her first cast. And the first cast is what wipes out the whole team. Like every time she casts is when she kills like the entire team, right? So I really feel the necessity to have the red Kayle and not triple blue, because I feel like having her have a little bit of extra attack speed helps her to cast a little bit faster. And there's so many times in a fight where I'm like, please Kayle, just cast and I win, and then like she just casts. So that's why I usually lean towards this build of Kayle. Like I said, I'm not sure. It's hard to check in the stats which Kayles are best, because it's like very situational and there's like lots of other factors that are involved. And like, you know, you need a lot of filters to exclude. But as you can see there, boom, she casts, everybody dies, right? Boom, she casts, everybody dies. right? But as you can see, some of these fights are really close, but I am full greeding, right? I'm 60 gold. I'm trying to go straight to 9. I am highest HP in the lobby. When you're high HP like this, you're incentivized to greed, because it's like I don't really have a need to like spend all my gold and randomly hit things. It's like I'd rather just like go towards level 9 and play around that. Now, the reroll Kayle line, the reason it's really nice is because if you hit Zoe 3, Kayle gets buffed by the star level of her units. It's like a lesser dealt with thing, because a lot of times, like, you know, I think to the extent that Kayle gets buffed by rerolling units is not as strong as some of the other sets. Like, for example, like in set 9 Void, last set with Country, for example. Country was really important. Like, it was a very noticeable difference having like, what's it called? Like, all of your Country units upgraded for the Hecarim, right? But in this case, I find that Kayle, even with like a Sivir 3 or a Garen 3 or a Zoe 3, I don't think her damage output, like, it's not like that noticeably different, right? I feel like if you have a good STORYWEAVER spot and they're not upgraded, you're still going to place around the same. Maybe I'm crazy for that, but that's what I mean. Like, I think it's fine just to tempo around it instead of just rerolling for the units. Here, Diana might be like a next in. I'm holding on to Lee Sin, right? Because Lee Sin's really good to pair with Irelia, because basically you can play Diana, Irelia, Rakan, Wukong, and just play like that type of core. I'm not really moving around the Kayle that much, but I should move it this turn, right? As you can see, like, there's this side, and then there's this side for the Senna, right? So they're positioned on one side, the Ashe is on this side, right? I think this side is 2 out of 3 people, right? It works out that I'm kind of on wrong side here, but his front line's pretty staggered, so it's fine. The problem is my Kayle is attacking the Nico, which is kind of awkward, because she might waste a cast. But it's okay. And as you can see, we have Random Silas on the board. Random Silas is doing work, right? Look how much damage Random Silas does when he's at the end of it, right? But there we go. Kayle cast, everybody's dead, right? Silas, second most damage. It's great. Everything's lit. And the more things Kayle kills, because I'm the STORYWEAVER augment, the more I get more and more ahead in terms of just having what's it called? Kayle basically just scaling, right? As you can see, a lot of the people that were low HP, they're just dying, right? They're just dying out, right? A lot of people are dead. There's 2 people dead before we even get to the 3rd augment, right? It's kind of wacky. Now, there's not really an item I need. This is the great thing about this. I have anti-heal, I have shred. So, because my Kayle is my main carry, this comp really works nicely with item economy. So I just made like frontline items, right? Eventually I can transfer all of these to one unit because I have Bramble, Declaw, Steadfast, right? Excuse me. So they all work really well. Here I take an extra STORYWEAVER emblem because it makes it a little bit easier to cap out my board. Right now I can play like 4 Dragon Lord instead, which caps even higher, right? I'm not necessarily playing towards like 10 STORYWEAVER, but it is loot subscription, right? Don't forget, it is loot. So I could just randomly get an extra STORYWEAVER emblem and then boom, I'm level 10 and I'm 10 STORYWEAVER. You know what I mean? So having the extra emblem is pretty nice. And it does more than just like a random damage item in my opinion. Because I think like just at this point, my Kayle is my main carry and she has all her items. So I'm okay with it. But anyways, I just barely beat this guy. This guy is actually quite strong. Like, you know, he almost beat me. Like I literally won by a little bit of Soraka. But that's why the placement really matters, right? Like my Kayle was able to delete most of his front line, and that really helped me to get there. Here, I'm just looking for like a last augment, right? Anything that's like really nice combat would be nice. I don't necessarily need anything in particular. I actually checked the stats when I was playing the game. So I don't think heavy hitters was really nice, and Gifts from the Fallen wasn't very good. Artifacts, there's a lot of artifacts that are misses. I'm just trying to see if I reroll this one. I think I do for sure. Let's reroll it. Yep. And then Unified. And then I just take Unified. Because even though I have Ultras, the same thing applies, right? Basically with Unified, my whole front line basically just gains a bunch of armor and MR. So now they're all super tanky, right? I have Bruiser in, I have a bunch of armor and MR, right? If I really want to, I could also, when I level up, play 4 Bruiser, right? If I want to keep this Silas, I can play 4 Bruiser upon level up, or even now, right? I can lose like the Lee Sin and just play 4 Bruiser. I know I'm not getting value for Unified on this unit. The Sivir's in the wrong spot. Sivir buffs the attack speed of the units that are next to it, so I wanted to put it next to the Kayle, but I just messed up. This positioning was really bad, so it took a while for my Kayle to get to the Alloon. So as you can see, the Alloon cast just kills everybody. My Silas is stuck on a fucking Sand Soldier, or whatever you call them, and then Alloon just kind of kills everybody with the Execute. But I think if my Kayle was one spot over, right? Here, I'm actually talking about it because I was on stream, so I was saying a lot of the other stuff. I'm just redoing the audio because when I'm streaming, like, sometimes, like, you know, it's a little bit more jumbled, so I think here it's a little bit more coherent. But what I was saying is if my Kayle was one spot over, I probably would have won that fight. Because you kind of want to be able to, like, shred the front line, but then the Kayle can target the back line without the Alloon kind of being able to scale. Like, the Alloon's the main... the Alloon casting with the Archangels getting bigger and bigger, it's like that's the one you have to do. Anyways, I get Tome here. I pop it. It's not Storyweaver, so I'm like, oh shit, that's not good. But there's a Dragon Lord emblem. But my Tome tailoring is so bad because like my Tome should be tailored, and I got Arcanist and Invoker. You know what I mean? Who's even an Invoker on this board? I got Arcanist. I guess it's the last one that was... Like, what are my tomes? I want to see. Shouldn't I have 3 tomes in? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, I only have 11, so it should be 2 tailored. Okay, so then it was just the Dragon Lord that was tailored. Sad. It is what it is, though. If I had Storyweaver, it's like a win on the spot. But this is what I mean, right? Like, this guy... if he got Sniper +1, I was talking about this on stream as well, right? This guy's level 9, 50 gold, right? If he got Sniper +1, he's a really good chance of outcapping me, because the Sniper +1 damage would probably delete my front line before I could, right? So here, I'm just playing towards Dragon Lord. I really want to Rakan. That's what I'm rolling for right now, right? I don't really see a point in going level 10 here. I just kind of want to replace some units, play like an Aurelia, Rakan, and kind of like make things work out that way. So I'm rolling pretty deep. It's level 9 odds, right? And I'm not finding any Rakan, so I just wasted like 50 gold for no reason. Like, I could have easily not rolled here, but I just wanted to spike because this guy's a little bit scary, right? The Ghostly guy. He has 2 Ghostly emblems because there was one on Carousel as well. So this guy's going to be 8 Ghostly. Or is already 8 Ghostly. I don't know if he is 8 Ghostly. I think he's only 6 Ghostly because he's playing extra snipers. But this guy is really fucking strong. As you can see, I got deleted. And the other guy with the extra Ink Shadow, I'm not too worried about him. But, you know, I want to just max cap my board, right? Having 1 extra Dragon Lord. I know I could play like a Diana. But basically 4 Dragon Lord gives me the stun, which is a pretty big spike, right? But a lot of the boards are getting really wacky with the loot subscription. Here I'm just kind of holding on to this Galio, because what if I hit Galio 3? I'm just finding on my roll down. As you can see, I'm rolling like all my gold down. I'm not contested. And I didn't find a single copy of Rakan. I rolled like, what is that, 60 gold on level 9? Right? Very low roll. But I high rolled at the beginning, so you know, it's all fine. It is all good. Here my positioning is pretty good. My Kayle has a good angle to like delete most of these units. Which is nice. Oh, never mind. My Kayle targeted this Yone, and then great. But this guy has a really bad Ornn item, but I think I lose here. Yeah, so as you can see, it's like I'm slowly falling behind, but I think these guys can kill each other, right? Like, I think one of them killed the Ghostly guy, which is actually really nice for me, because that's the thing with the matchups, right? A lot of times matchups work out really well. Oh no, wait, is the Ghostly guy still alive? I think the Ghostly guy died. I think this was the Ghostly guy, right? So, like, I had really bad matchups against everybody but the Sniper. But because they have so little HP, they're all fighting each other. And it's actually helping me out a lot. Anyways, I just take Rakan here. I know there was a spat. And, like, ooh, maybe you play around 10 Storyweaver. It's like the game's going to be over, right? Everybody's 1 HP. The game's going to be over before that even happens. So here, I switch out Soraka for Rakan. So I get Altruist with that. If I hit, like, a Wukong 2, I'll gladly switch it over Silas, right? And I'm staggering my lines a little bit because when you play Alloon hits the row with the most amount of HP. So I'm trying to stagger some of the units. Actually, I probably just like move them over. Yeah, I didn't move the Sivir in time. Here I'm on the correct side. This is the side I want to be when fighting Alloon because I want to delete this row and then I want to start targeting these units. Sorry, my music stopped. Let me just put that back to play. I think it would have been more efficient if I put the same positioning, but then I staggered like a bruiser over here to hopefully make the Elune hit somebody else. But yeah, I beat this guy now because of good positioning. And then this guy I think I'm more favored in. But one of either the Elune or this guy that was way stronger killed the ghostly guy that I think I never beat. Because the whole point of my comp is that my Kayle attacks a bunch and I have Dragon Lords. And I don't even think, even if I capped out, I would be able to beat this guy. But as you can see here, I don't even ever hit Irelia. There was like an Irelia in shop. I could have switched the Sivir for Irelia, being honest here. That's probably the play. You switch the Sivir for the Irelia, because the Sivir is kind of useless. But the Sivir does give attack speed to my Kayle. So at this point, I'm just kind of like, whatever. I just need to use my money to find upgrades. But I do have an Irelia here. I can easily just switch the 2 units. I think it's probably better. But this matchup is really good for me because even though this guy has like, this guy's all about scaling with Wardens, but the thing is my Kayle, I think out DPS's the Ashe, especially since he doesn't have Guinsoo on Ashe. So yeah, it just ends up being a first, right? Now this was a little bit high roll with the first. Usually when you play these type of games, like with Kayle, you're typically more aiming towards like somewhere in the range of like 2nd to 3rd, right? It's a very like 2nd to 3rd kind of comp because as you can see, I was like out capped by a lot of other boards. But a very teachable and good game nonetheless, right? I really like playing around the red Kayle. Obviously, there's some things I can optimize, right? Like the Zoe, like the Zoe and the Zyra, they're both just 2-star, and I'm playing towards this AP line, so you know it might have been better to maybe pick AP Kayle, but I definitely like red Kayle the most. I like red Kayle then blue, right? But then Sivir could have been swapped out. Obviously, I missed really hard on my roll down. I was looking primarily for Rakan, but there was probably a lot of other things I could have got. Like, I could have easily switched this Sylas for, like, a Nautilus, for example. Because the damage doesn't matter late game as much as just having, like, the stun that can disrupt some of the backline carries, right? There was a lot of things on that roll down when I was looking for Rakan that I could have done to optimize the board. But, because I was live, obviously there's some mistakes that would be made. Because I'm not entirely focused. You know, I'm talking to chat a bunch. And stuff like that. But I think it was still alright. And yeah, this was just a fun game, and I hope it was enjoyable for everybody. Thank you for watching.